Let's talk about the American dream. Is it a reality for everyone? Today, we're diving into one of the most complex questions in the United States, the link between poverty and a person's ability to climb that economic ladder. And believe me, this isn't just about numbers. It's about the very promise of the nation.
So it all boils down to this one huge question. Is poverty a matter of personal choice, something an individual is responsible for? Or is it the result of circumstances completely beyond their control? This single debate shapes just about everything, from our laws to how we see our own neighbors. Okay, so to even begin to tackle that question, we first have to understand the different sides of the argument. And these aren't just abstract theories. These are the ideas that are shaping policies and our own perceptions every single day.
Really, the whole debate comes down to two major viewpoints. On one side, you have the idea that poverty is about individual factors, that people are lazy or maybe raised in a culture of self-pity. But on the other side, the argument is that people are trapped by forces outside of their control, that they're victims of their circumstances. These are the two fundamental battle lines. But, before we can really have a meaningful debate, we need to be on the same page with the facts. So, how do we actually define poverty here in the United States? And who gets counted? Let's get into the numbers.
Well, it turns out there are two main ways to look at it. First, there's absolute poverty. This is all about basic survival, not having enough money for the absolute necessities like food or a roof over your head. But then there's relative poverty, and this is different. This is about where you stand compared to everyone else in your society. You might have enough to survive, but you're still so far behind that you can't really participate in the world around you. And wow, this slide really shows you the difference. On the left, that's what we typically imagine as absolute poverty. But look at the right. That's the reality of relative poverty in the US. Census data shows that a lot of people who are officially poor still own things like TVs and cell phones. And this distinction is so important because it completely changes how we think about what poverty even is and what we should do about it. To make it really concrete, the US government sets an official poverty line. So, for example, back in 2009, that line for a family of 4 was $22,050. If your family made just $1 less than that for the entire year, you were officially considered to be living in poverty. And this is where the numbers get really telling. Poverty does not affect all Americans in the same way. The data here shows a poverty rate of 24% for Black Americans and 21% for Hispanic Americans. Both are more than double the rate for white Americans. And look at the rate for households led by non-married women, 18%. It's pretty clear that race and family structure are deeply connected to economic outcomes. So when you look at all the data, 3 groups really stand out: minorities, children, and households headed by women. In fact, this pattern is so consistent that sociologists actually have a name for it: the feminization of poverty. It recognizes this undeniable trend where women and their kids make up a bigger and bigger slice of the nation's poor. All right, so that brings us to the next big question, right? The question of hope. It's all about social mobility. If you're born into poverty in America, can you actually climb out? What does that social ladder really look like? Now, this isn't a new conversation. There have been huge efforts to try and influence this social ladder. One of the biggest was President Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty back in the 1960s. This was a massive shift in government policy, creating all these programs designed to give people the tools to help themselves and, hopefully, break that cycle.
The official term for what we're talking about here is social mobility. It's just the movement of people between social classes. You could say this is the engine that's supposed to power the entire American dream.
But it's not as simple as just moving up. There are actually different kinds of mobility. You have horizontal mobility. Think of a teacher who moves to a new school. Their job changes, but their social level pretty much stays the same. Then you have vertical mobility, which is what we usually think of, climbing up or sometimes falling down that ladder. And maybe most importantly, there's intergenerational mobility. This asks the big question: do kids end up in a different social class than their parents were?
But all this movement, this climbing or falling, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It happens inside a bigger societal structure. You can think of it like a game, with its own set of rules that can make it easier or way harder to move around.
And these systems can be wildly different. On one extreme, you've got a closed caste system. In a system like that, your status is ascribed, meaning it's decided the moment you're born and there's basically no way to change it. But on the other end, you have an open class system, which is what the US is. Here, your status is supposed to be achieved. You earn it through your own efforts. And that means, in theory, that mobility is possible for anybody.
And so that brings us right back to where we started. We began with this simple idea of choice versus circumstance, but now we can see it's a lot more complicated. We've looked at how we even define poverty, who it affects the most, and the different rules of the system people are playing in. So with all of that in mind, the final question is for you. What do you think is the real key to climbing the ladder in America today?